what some people consider to be appeasement, what's happening right now in Ukraine. I see your face there, Caroline. I mean, whatever happens, if there is a peace deal, the Prime Minister has hinted that that will mean that there might be British troops on the ground. See him talking exclusively to Robert Peston. Have a look.
Pete Hegseth, Defence Secretary, wants French and UK troops in Ukraine policing that peace. Are you open to that?
Well, I won't get into the particular capabilities, but I do accept that if there is peace, then there needs to be some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine, and the UK will play its part in that.
You know, our Defence Secretary makes clear that the military is, to say the least, underfunded. An ex-head of the Navy says that the military has been hollowed out. Even if there is a peace, how on earth are Britain going to provide the type of support when there just simply isn't the funding for the military?
Well, we can't do it on our own, and that's why, you know, it's been so critical in the last 24 hours, the Voice is talking about what's happening here, because, you know, we're almost jumping ahead a little bit.
Right.
And we're jumping ahead partly because panic has been created by the fact that President Trump had this 90-minute phone call with Putin in which he seems to sort of, you know, had a really sort of quite, some would say, open discussion before negotiations have even started. And, of course, you know, you cannot resolve this. Everybody wants this conflict to stop. But you've got to have both America and Europe as well, but also Zelensky and Putin for Ukraine and Russia at the table at the same time. And these sidebar sort of, they're not negotiations, really. They're sort of almost like fireside chats in which actually Trump has almost said, oh, Ukraine can't expect to have its land back. Ukraine cannot join NATO. That's preempting a situation.
Like, what's the price? You know, there are over, well, close to 50,000 troops, young men and boys in some cases in Ukraine, close to probably 600,000 Russians. But think about Ukraine. It's a historical irony that this summit's taking place in Munich. What price of peace? How much land is it tolerable for the West to accept that Putin can grab? You know, I remember Margaret Thatcher years ago, it's 50 years, not long ago, since she became Tory leader, saying, dictators have to be beaten, right? You never, ever appease a dictator. That's the lesson of Munich and the Falklands and so on. I mean, is this appeasement? What do you think, Salma?
Look, I think there was always going to be a situation when we had to have a settled negotiation, and by that I mean there was not going to be an all-out victory on either side. In some ways, it's a relief that Russia wasn't just able to go in and take over the entirety of the Ukraine, and the fact that they were able to withstand it for so long is testament to their strength. But I absolutely agree that we are getting ahead of ourselves. But the reality is we are in a completely different context with President Trump in charge, who is, generally speaking, quite erratic when it comes to foreign policy, and also with the Brits actually being an outlier even in Europe in terms of where we are. You're right, Mrs Thatcher was a conviction politician. She led by that. We don't really have that in our world at the moment. And where we do have it, with people like President Trump, it's not what we regard as the old world order. So I don't think... I think Caroline and I would probably agree that this is not the outcome that any of us want, where you've got land going back to Russia that they're not entitled to.
So what happens there? Because it seems like, you know, President Trump is just saying, I'm going to sort this out. I'm going to sort this out directly with Russia. Ukraine doesn't get a say. Nobody else gets a say. And what, you know, Ukraine just have to go, OK, this is the only way we're going to get peace.
Well, there's no way there's going to be peace in that if that happens. It won't happen because, you know, look, we are part of a really important alliance that was sort of founded, you know, after World War II, you know, that created NATO. This is our continent, and this is about Ukraine, but it's also about concerns about those Baltic states who left the Soviet Union and their security in the future.
But do you think European leaders are going to turn around and say to President Trump, we don't agree with what you're doing, we don't want you to do this? Because that's what it could come down to, isn't it?
I think we're used to already, aren't we, that President Trump says a lot of things in advance of a final decision being made. I think, actually, David Lammy I saw yesterday, and I think there's sort of some of the other British politicians, sort of encouraging some caution from some of the European leaders to not get too... I mean, they're right to be worried, there's no doubt about that, but until people sit down and we make sure that the right voices are at the table to start the negotiations, it's not over until it's over. So it's really important. But going back to the point about defence spending, where Trump has a point, and I think Biden said it before, is on the European side, not enough from all those NATO members has been going into defence. And we need to increase ours. But the truth is, even by increasing 2.5%, which is what the government's aim is, some are saying that's just not enough.
Well, front page of the Daily Telegraph, 2.5% on defence won't touch the sides. And, I mean, that's the worry, isn't it? That as a country, we can't afford to increase defence spending.
Not just that, the fact that all of that gets sort of swept up in inflationary costs as well, so you don't actually know what you're going to get for that increase in spending. But I think that, and I agree with you, Caroline, where Trump is right is that we do need to increase our defence spending because our world is a lot more dangerous than it was, say, even 10 years ago. But the reality is that if whatever the negotiation, we have to get comfortable with the fact that there might be UK troops that are there having to defend Ukraine on a more semi-permanent basis.
Right.
Because if they're not going to allow Ukraine to go into NATO, then Ukraine will always be vulnerable.
This is part of America's new approach, right? So we're not going to be Uncle Sam, said Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary. Uncle Sam is one thing, we're not going to be Uncle Sucker anymore. In other words, Trump's refrain, we're paying too much, right? And it's up to you, Europeans, to defend NATO and its borders. That's all very well, right? But he's given away the critical element of a negotiation here, which is very difficult to understand. I saw the press conferences, you probably did. He said, right, yeah, no, Ukraine is not likely to join NATO. In other words, the most important negotiating tool to say, this is a possibility. And that would, of course, not just protect NATO, but as you described, there'll be people in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, members of the European Union, right, that will be extremely frightened listening to this, right?
Yeah, and all those countries, Rob, have been for years, before the Ukraine war that started 3 years ago, have been saying to their colleagues in the European Union and within NATO, we are really worried about what's happening because, as we know, this partly started back in, 2013, 2014? When, you know, Russia moved into Crimea. And the story of Crimea is the West failed because they stayed there and then they advanced in terms of this war that they've committed against Ukraine.
Appeasement. And he's made clear that the Crimea isn't coming back and also these regions that Putin has annexed. You know, you think we live in a world of international order where two members of the UN, this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But we don't live in a world of international order anymore. That whole order is breaking. That's what you see in the way that China's economy has risen and the way that they are moving into the rest of the world. It's what you see with hostile state actors like Russia and the conflict that ensues from their behaviour. The really frightening thing, and this is where actually, you know, Britain does need to take a leading position, and I don't know that Keir Starmer is there sort of psychologically, is that you do have to step up because we have been the ones, even in Europe, who have been trying to push for support for Ukraine. So I find it very troubling that, you know, the US Defence Secretary is saying, oh, you guys, you know, we're not going to be Uncle Sucker, because the price isn't how much you've paid. The value is what we've had in terms of restored world peace. And Americans, too, have benefited from that. So it's not like they've put out money for nothing.
Talking about paying a price, we're also hearing more talks about tariffs and how President Trump's announcement on tariffs could cause this global trade war because of this reciprocal plan, and the UK would be caught up on this, basically, because we put VAT on goods coming from America, then they will put tariffs on us. I mean, how damaging do you think this could be for our economy, which is already shaking
I'm a bit confused by this, to be honest. Because VAT is value-added tax, isn't it? It's a sales tax.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I've travelled in America and I think I've pretty much paid loads of different sales tax on all sorts of things that I bought in the United States of America. So I don't quite understand this, because this VAT is not a tax on American products. We all pay it on lots of services and lots of products in the UK. So I'm hoping this is a bit of an aberration and we'll get sensible.
The difficulty is, right, this strategy, let's call it that, if it is one, by Trump to go around his neighbours and the rest of the world saying, right, we're going to put a tariff on you if you don't comply with the things we want. So in the case of Canada and Mexico, it was, we want you to stamp out illegal immigration, etc. The problem is, it may seem like bully boy tactics, but so far, it seems to have worked, right? And the rest of the world is doing precisely what he wants. So if there is a threat to us of tariffs, it seems like we're going to be, well, not exactly having a special relationship, but the weaker party in a very bad marriage.
Well, but it works both ways. Once you break out into these sort of conflicts, it's going to work both ways. But you're right, he has this transactional approach, doesn't he? I mean, it's like he said, you know, in terms of providing air cover if a peace negotiations go well between Ukraine and Russia. He'll suggest some air cover in exchange for valuable mineral sources that there are in Ukraine. He's a very transactional person. And that's what we're going to have to, that's what we're dealing with. And the question is, how will we and other countries respond to that, and what can we push back with?
Do you think Keir Starmer is going to stand up to Trump, though, at any point? Or do you think we...
Yes.
I think the question is, right, because we, in comparison to them, as a trading partner, are so much smaller, and because Europe, you know, has got to make this decision, you know, as all member states, do we have any negotiating power with Trump, really? I mean, I know Justin Trudeau took a bit of a stand against him and had reciprocal tariffs, but you know, are we really saying that Sir Keir Starmer is going to be like, actually, President Trump, you know, we're not going to take this and this is how we need to negotiate? It feels like we are all cowering.
This is a story about standing up to bullies across the world. It's very interesting. In Canada, the candidate who's looking to take over the Liberal Party said, look, you tariff us, you're going to get the mother of all tariffs. And, you know, frankly, that sort of strong talk is the only thing that Trump understands. You know, I wonder about that. Do you think, Caroline, that Keir Starmer has the backbone to go into the room with Donald Trump and say, I hear what you say, but we're going to impose the tariff, we're going to impose tariffs on our goods, luxury goods, a number of things that go into your country. And just to be clear, we are the US's main trading partner.
Yeah, I do think Starmer has that. And to be honest, I think actually any British Prime Minister would be standing up and saying that. But I think one of the things we learned from the first administration of Donald Trump, sometimes he says a lot of things and it's not comfortable and it very much disrupts the normal order of things that we're used to. But actually, when it comes down to it, it might not be as it plays out in what he said in his first sentences on things. And these are about negotiations. The thing about Canada and Mexico, when he announced tariffs on them, I mean, it was very much about connected to political issues around border controls. And, you know, he seems to weave into what has been traditionally these trade negotiations, a whole load of other things. And that's not usual. That's not usual. But I do think, and I think it's, again, you know, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, you know, they're as much as anyone worried about some of the things that are coming out from America and from Trump and his envoys and secretaries of state about Ukraine. But also, I think there's a thing to just take a breath, because actually be firm, but don't rush in on the basis of a few things that are said. Yeah. Save your fire for when you really need to get around that negotiating table. And I think that's true for what's happening in Ukraine.
I mean, it's all very well, but, you know, when you're a world leader, the leader of the free world, that's announcing global policy after one phone call, right?
We might need to send in the big guns, do you think? Because we're hearing that the King has been drafted in on a charm offensive.
Yeah, the King.
He's going on a US trip next year to both America and Canada with Queen Camilla as well, their biggest royal tour yet. And we'll be deployed to help with diplomatic relations. Maybe we need to bring that visit forward.
He could take some
so
Scottish
the King
whiskey.
could have a little word.
Maybe he's having a little word about Canada because he's still king there as well. So, I mean, there might be a few things that he's got to raise with President Trump. I mean, this is when anybody criticises the monarchy, this is the defence, right? Is that the King and the royal family can go into places and smooth things over that politicians just can't.
The magic of the royal family. We'll wait to see what happens with that one. Rachel Reeves, we talked about the economy. She's come under pressure not just for the economy today, isn't she? There's more scrutiny of her CV and what she's been saying and what's happened over previous years. The Daily Mail have got this as their front page. Reeves under pressure to come clean on expenses, and the Daily Star are having a bit of fun with this one as well, aren't they? Sort of saying Chancellor's Pinocchio CV in full. So this goes back to these claims that she sort of embellished slightly what she did when she worked for HBOS, wasn't it? It was when she was actually in customer services, but she said that she was working as an economist. She also said that she spent a decade working as an economist at the Bank of England, but it actually was 9 months earlier than was on her profile. And now it seems there have been some expenses claims, apparently inappropriate spending said to have included lavish dinners, taxis and gifts, including for other members of staff. She's said to have bought a £152 handbag on expenses as a Christmas gift for her boss. So there are question marks here. Kemi Badenoch is urging her to come clean on this, Salma.
So first of all, just to say, this is not like a regular person embellishing their CV a little bit, right? People want to put their best foot forward when they go for a job interview or whatever it might be.
All right.
This is actually something far more significant, which is
horrified.
I mean,
well, not lie.
You
obviously.
can actually be fired. It's an act of gross misconduct.
Well,
if you lie about the title of your job, especially
lying,
where it has a significant impact on whether you got the job in the first place.
So there's a difference between embellishment and lying.
and trying to put your best foot forward, but actually lying about the facts. Now, I want
just
to
be clear,
understand...
these are claims so far. None of them
exactly
have been
because
found.
we haven't really heard a response from the Chancellor on this.
Right.
So, but it's just to be really clear about the distinction between... People might be watching this at home thinking, well, everybody, embellishes and tries to put their best foot forward. But this is really about her trying to create credibility in the city, with banks, with business, to say, well, I've had a really serious CV in finance. And she's never really been able to deal with the claim that... saying best part of a decade she spent at, in the finance industry, Bank of England, when actually that turned out to be about 5.5 years. So, yes, technically that's true, best part of a decade. But does that mean that actually she has the credibility to run the economy in the way that she said?
Yeah, so, Caroline, what do you make of this? Because people are saying trust is at issue here.
Yeah.
Well, there are chancellors at Exchequer who have not been economists, and they've been the chancellors at Exchequer in the past, and she's an economist. But on the CV,
but they didn't say they were. Sorry to... I mean, that's the point. Yeah, there's been plenty, authors, Disraeli, the lot, that didn't know very much about economics, but they didn't claim to have worked for the Bank of England.
So what I'm just saying is, when Salma said, is she actually qualified for the job? Actually, whatever you think about economists, she is an economist. On the issue about the CV... Look, I think, you have to take responsibility for what you put there. I mean, actually, if you add in the HBOS experience, which was a different sort of job from when she was at the Bank of England, if you added those together, it was the best part of the decade. And I think you have to take responsibility. I feel like it's a bit like that episode of The Apprentice, where the finalists come to the end and they interrogate their CVs and tear them apart. There's that issue. So I think she has to be clear about that, and she clearly has had to amend. And to be honest, if you do a CV and you publish it, you don't say it's your staff, you clear it in your name. On this expenses thing, from what I've read, and I went and looked through yesterday, all the stuff, it seems to me, someone made some allegation, it was investigated, it wasn't taken up with any of the parties, including Rachel Reeves, for whom these allegations were made against. She actually left HBOS, like a lot of people, don't forget the financial crash on a voluntary redundancy basis. She even was given her car for another 6 months, and she got a reference. I think there's a lot of gossip going on here, potentially, that really doesn't stand up to accusing her of anything.
Just because they're talking about it doesn't mean it's not true, and you're right to say...
But it also doesn't mean it's true,
To be sure,
Rob.
it's a BBC investigator. They haven't got to the bottom of it. There's a long statement that I also went through, and it's difficult to unpick tittle-tattle from fact. I get that. But the question isn't so much that. It's if it is found that there was fiddling of expenses. And I need to emphasise there's absolutely no clear evidence about that at this point. And if it's discovered that it wasn't her staff, but it was her who said, no, I was an economist when I wasn't. In other words, she misrepresented her job title. Do you think she should resign?
Well, look, you read the detail that I did. What seemed to be... I mean, actually, to be honest, it sounds like an everyday story of banking, quite frankly. What seemed to be going on at HBOS, their management, senior management, had credit cards. They had something called a motivation card, which they apparently could use for gifts for staff to reward them, could use for birthdays. By the time I ended reading that article, I was confused because some people said, oh, yeah, we all did this. They could use it for lunches, they could use it for taxes. As I say, I mean, when the financial crash happened, there was a lot came out about the banking sector, which showed that this is pretty rife in the banking sector. So I don't think necessarily this is something about Rachel Reid or the people that have been cited in this. It seems to be there was a lot of confusion about how they were using these cards, but also they were available. They were available to use for expenses. They were available to use for gifts.
The more egregious thing about this isn't, and I would accept that explanation. You know, you need to have the evidence before you make a charge. But the more egregious thing is the kind of saying you're an economist when you're not, in terms of HBOS and looking at customer service, and then also saying that you worked at the Bank of England for the best part of a decade, but it actually being truncated. And I can understand why somebody might want to kind of hone their credentials and present them in a certain way, especially when you're about to walk into being Chancellor of the Exchequer. But surely you must see that there is a problem with that.
Oh, look, I'm not saying that. I think I just said earlier, I think she has to take responsibility for what you put out there.
Well, what should she do?
And if you say you've been working...
Help me understand, what should she do? Should she go on television, issue a tweet saying, by the way, everybody, I'm in charge of the comedy, but I told a porky on that one?
Look, I think she should just be clear. She did change... she did amend it last year. I think there was something about her role at HBOS to clarify what that job was. She has amended her CV in terms of the datelines. Only Rachel can really explain this in terms of her CV.
Well, just to say, she's got Sir Keir Starmer's backing still, though, hasn't she? He was asked whether he was comfortable. She exaggerated her relevant experience. He said the issues were from many years ago, but he and the Chancellor get up every day to make sure the economy in our country, which was badly damaged under the last government, is revived and we have growth. So he goes on, but he's standing by her.
Well, I mean, he's going to have to, but let's see what happens post the spending review in March, because this is not the kind of thing... The person that sort of got into number 10 by saying that he wants to be whiter than white, bit holier than thou, straight because he hated the Tories and we were all god-awful, he's going to have to also account for the behaviour of his cabinet members.
On the spending review and inflation and the price of things, there's a shocking story this morning. I know, Caroline, you're exercised about this. Soaring price hikes have seen people paying... I was absolutely staggered, 25% more for baby formula over the last 2 years. And there are people in this country who, it turns out, and we're going to be finding out more about this, who are watering down the baby formula they have in order to feed their infants.
It's just
it's absolutely disgusting, really, that people are put in that situation. And there's something called Healthy Start vouchers, which are for those people to support them when they have a baby and they haven't got much income. And apparently, from what I understand, the vouchers don't even cover the cost of a tin. I think inflation has been ranging from like 18% to 36% on baby formula. Right. I mean, it's like there's a cartel of a few companies that produce this good. What is disgusting about it as well is that the way they market these different formulas, for example, they say, oh, right, this is the one from 0 to 6 months. Then you need another one that's different from 6 to 12 months. And then you need something after that. It is a complete sham. And for mothers who, may not choose to or cannot breastfeed, because that is really important if you can do that, it is corrupt. And, we want to the idea that a parent is put in a situation to water down a formula and do that and be put in that situation, or be made to feel that if they don't buy something that is premium, or if they don't change it when the baby's 6 months, when they don't have to, they can stick to the same formula all the way through and be encouraged to do that. It's outrageous. And I think that I actually think there should be a price cap on infant formula food. I think it should be protected.
We'll be finding out,
The markets regulator is going to be publishing its final report into how baby formula is sold. So that comes out at 7 o'clock this morning. We'll find the details then. But, there's no doubt it's such an expensive time for families, and to have that extra pressure put on them, it just is a heartbreaking situation. Nearly 1 in 10 families supported by this charity Little Village, say that they're watering down. It just beggars belief, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, you know, the advice always is not to water down because it could be dangerous in terms of the lack of nutrients you're providing. And then there's the stress on top of it. It's not just the cost. It's not just that you've got to feed the baby, but it's the stress of thinking about where's the next box of formula going to come from. And just to say, you know, there will be lots of people who will say, well, you just got to breastfeed then. My mother couldn't breastfeed me, and I was dependent on formula. There are lots of children who will be dependent on formula. Breastfeeding doesn't work for everybody.
One of the issues is that there's government legislation that means that people can't use their discount cards in stores for breast formula. So let's see what happens. But presumably we hope that that's going to be something that changes, right?
The most important thing is how do we make sure that babies get access to the best food they need for their first 12 months, and formula or breast milk is part of that. And the government is there to... This is exactly the sort of thing, for me, there's lots of things I don't think government should be involved in, but this is exactly the sort of thing where you expect government to say, regulate, make sure the goods are safe, but also make sure they're accessible. Because the idea that somebody is trying to get, you know, the scoops in these tin and then water it down because they're running out of formula.
Can I ask you, it's you know, Valentine's Day, and I have my view about who a nightmare card would come from, but we were talking about nightmares this morning. Have you seen this video of what happened to this kayaker? It is my absolute...
Is this the whale one?
Yes. I mean, if you're looking for things to do this weekend, this might put you off kayaking. Because this man in a kayak was swallowed by a humpback whale.
He survived.
And only released after a few seconds. But the whale spat him out, essentially. He obviously wasn't to his liking. But, I mean, this, of all the things to happen, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I would not be kayaking out there, because the whale threat is real. I want to know what the government's doing about this.
This is like the Jonah and the whale, isn't it? Story sort of thing. You know, or Pinocchio, when Pinocchio, going back to Pinocchio, ended up inside the whale in the story. But I saw that video, and at first I thought, is this like fake sort of video, but it's not, is it? It's true.
It's
well,
true.
who knows why he spat him out? Maybe it is like the story.
Maybe the whale
and
loved
he repented of his sins, and there he was, vomited out. Delight to see you both. Thank you both very much. Now,